I'll start over here. We're gonna talk about Google, not Google. We're gonna talk about searching, but we're gonna talk about Google as one of the places to search. So, not gonna focus exactly on that. One of the things that I do frequently is to put the name of the person that I'm looking for into Google. And use quotation marks will tell Google that you are looking for that particular number of words together, a string of characters, and they will force that to come up first. So what this will say essentially is between the parentheses, the quotation marks, we're looking for Henry Martin Tanner on any website where those words all show up in that order. So
Do you have to use the codes?
when you, what?
You have to use the codes?
Yes. Yeah, otherwise what it'll do, generally it'll look for Henry Martin Tanner because you've just put all three of those words together, but by putting the quotes, you're forcing it to do that. Okay? And otherwise you're going to get the difference between 10 million responses and maybe a couple of thousand responses. Another thing, good thing to do is to put up a qualifier. And so when you look for this, now what I do is, say somebody comes in to the family history library and they start asking about their great-great-great-grandfather, whoever. Okay, so they start putting out names. Well, if I have the computer, if I'm not sitting alongside somebody where they're working on the computer showing what they're doing, then I will just kind of automatically start randomly putting in the names with the quotation marks to see what comes up. Because what happens here is you're basically not wanting to spend a great deal of time doing something that could be answered in 10 seconds instead of doing some exhaustive research. So here you have, well, guess what? You know why there's only that many? Let me do it again. Now, they're going to come up with 37 results, no matter what I do. Let's see why. Why is that going to occur? I have an idea. This is why it occurs. Let me tell you why it occurs.
After that,
It
quote
occurs.
make a difference?
No, it occurs because no, it's going to keep doing that to me. It occurs because I have already searched for this twice or three times today. And so basically Google has learned that I am looking for this, and until I tell it some more information, like clicking on some of these websites, it's going to say, hey, I gave you information, forget it. We're not going to go any further. That's the problem, because Google does keep track of every search you do. And so it learns. And so they know when you make a certain type of search that it will come up with the similar information. And then if you do this from other computers around the world, it will know it's you. I'm just going to throw it off by putting in a different.
Put Arizona.
Let's try this. Oh, I didn't get it right. There we go. Arizona.
You type like I do.
Nah, I'm still going to come up with just a few. Let's try the last one, and then we'll try that. And then Oh, okay. Here's the problem. Yeah, it helped if I knew how to
I know
type,
what you
wouldn't
mean.
it?
It's harder to stand up and type up.
There we go. Oh well, we're not going to get any more results out of this. there goes that experiment. Okay, what I would be showing, let me explain what happens. Normally, I would get about 5,000 to 6,000 results on this search out of Google. Why it's doing this to me today is because it follows me around. And I'm not paranoid, it really does. Okay, so what happens is that what I've been doing in previous classes is going over to another search engine like Bing for Microsoft and doing a similar search. In that case, what happens is the number of returns is usually considerably less than Google. And the answer there is that most of the search engines are not as thorough or as complete as going out on, as Google is out on the internet. So that's just that. We'll forego that example because it didn't work today, but we'll show you what happened. So that would be the first step. The first step would be to go out on the internet, start looking for the names of the people that you're interested in finding with variations. For instance, in this case, Henry Tanner, Henry M. Tanner, H.M. Tanner, those are all ways that he signed his name or filled out his name at various times during his life. And so they would be valid things to start looking for. Okay, so what else? Where do we go from here? Well, the next step, is a very important step, is that to realize that there are three things that we need to know about somebody at the very, very, very minimum to find out any information, and that is we need some kind of a name, although that's the one that's the highly variable. That we need a date, but that can be an approximate. But the one thing that we can't give up approximately is the place. In order to identify someone, we need to know the exact place that an event occurred. Now, you see plenty of people coming in and they'll say things to me like, oh, I'm looking for my great-great-great-grandmother, and I'll say, okay, what was her name? Mary? Is that it? Yeah, Mary. And where did she live? Ohio. Okay, and when? Oh, about 1820. And I'll go, no, we don't go looking for that. It's a waste of time. Okay, so, but we do need to know an exact place. So next step we're going to use is use Google to find places. And this is where the audience participation comes in. And we'll go to Maps. And it shows us sitting here on Brigham Young University campus. And we won't look for Henry Martin Tanner on a map because that isn't going to work. Okay, so anybody got a place they'd like to? Let me tell you this, the lineup so far. So far, this would be the 11th class of this series. And so far, we've had 2 suggested places out of about 25 or 30 that I would consider to be difficult to find.
You want a really obscure place?
Oh, yeah, that's what I'm looking for. I'm looking for something really obscure.
Little Poor Valley, Scott County, Virginia.
Okay, say again.
Little Poor Valley.
Little Poor Valley as in...
There's a big Poor Valley and a little Poor Valley.
Okay, as in
Scott.
P-O-O-R
Yep.
type poor? Okay. We've had springs, so I just wanted to make sure it wasn't the water kind of pouring. Okay, so we're going to call it Little Poor Valley in
Scott County, Virginia.
Virginia. Okay, well, there's plenty of them in Tennessee so far.
Well, the one in Hawkins County is the same valley.
Valley, VA.
Yeah.
Let's try it and see what happens. Well, there you go. Okay, so now where do we go from here? There's plenty of places in Tennessee, but apparently Little Poor Valley.
If you go to the one that's the Hawkins County, Tennessee, it was one of the ones that came up there. That's the same valley. It runs across the state line.
Oh, okay, so it's the same place. It's just, so if we just take out Little Poor Valley the Hockin County one in Tennessee is the same place. Okay, let's see how close that is to the Virginia line. And of course, what's the time frame here?
1860s?
1860s?
Yeah.
Okay. So we have that running into, let's keep going, and we can probably see a state here. There's a line. We're right on the state line. Almost exactly on the state line. Okay. And if we want to come in and see what we're dealing with. Okay, so this is what I would do. First of all, the question comes up as to, does this place exist? And then the second question, of course, is where is it and what does it look like and all this? Why? Mainly because if you know more, the more information you know about the place, the more places you are going to have, more things that are going to be suggested for searching for records. So we try to find out a little bit about the area, particularly about what kinds of things are there. So here we go. There's our guy. We drop him down. And yes, it certainly does look like that place. Sort of like every other place around that place too.
I was going to say, that looks a lot like this place in North Carolina I just went to.
Yeah.
See, if you open that Lakes Mountain.
You know what happens, you can see, you can use the street view here. This is called Street View from Google by dropping this little guy down on the streets that are all blue. Now, if you want to see what's going on with Street View, go back to the map, come out like this, keep coming out until we get the United States. Now, basically what Google has covered, everything that turns blue will be where Google has driven in Street View. Okay, so there are very few places left where cars can't go. And where cars can't go, then Google's going in on foot, or on bicycles, or on ATVs. So places like the bottom of the Grand Canyon, kind of a side note, all the Utah national parks and state parks are now being trailed, all the trails are being walked by Google with their Google guys out there. Okay, so we'll go back to our place. Okay, so we have Poor Valley, and it would probably extend up here a little bit into Virginia, and so
Yep.
we're pretty
It runs
much,
up until the Holston River cuts across it,
yeah.
which is up close to Kingsport.
And you can see all the roads that are in that area. Mainly following the roads, the rivers, and the valleys, northeast by southwest mountain ranges that everybody has to go over, and these are the little passes over the mountain ranges where they've built roads. So pretty common in here. This gives us some idea that we probably are looking for somebody who lived in a very rural environment. So we're looking for farmland records, looking for probate records, looking for anything that has to do with a land transaction back then, maybe a bounty land warrant, all of these types of things that could be associated with living in that particular area. What you probably wouldn't want to look for is any kind of utility records.
City directories.
Would you list those one more time? Farmland, did you say farmland records? And what else?
Probate records, land
Probate,
records,
land,
tax
anything dealing
records.
with land.
Okay.
Bounty land, land warrants from the war. Those are ways that people got this particular kind of property sometimes. That gives us an idea, and that gives us a place. If we were to go to, one thing that happens as we get in here though, is we find out that There's more that we need to know about this particular area. And it doesn't appear to, it appears to be a geographical area rather than a town. So what we're going to need to do with the map is locate more precisely where this farm was or where the ranch was, the dwelling was, because at that point we're going to find out what the next or nearest town was. In this case, it looks to me like we've got a place across the mountain. You've got another thing to be aware of is that that these may be on a map look like they're very close, but you need to be aware of the roads, because if it turns out that there's no road over to here, or it's a very difficult road, then this might be closer, or this. So it looks to me like Rogersville. Any of these towns sound familiar?
Seguonsville is actually, oh yeah, I've got cousins that live there in Seguonsville.
This one right here?
Yep.
Okay, well then let's go look at that. That would be a good place to go look at. Well, we managed to get onto a bridge. That looks like a really reliable bridge. And let's get back on the map and see. Oh, we're right across from the, go back to the map. We're right across from the town. There we go. There's the town. Now we can
Cindy's
drop
Diner.
in and have a look at the town.
Have you been there?
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Okay, well, the first thing we find is a church. And it's a library,
Yeah.
public library.
There's a Baptist church and there's a Methodist church in that town.
And it's called Surgoinsville. Okay,
Surgoinsville.
so let's look that up. Surgoinsville, Tennessee. And one thing you're going to find as you do searches for places is that Wikipedia, which is the big online encyclopedia, which is presently trying to get a bunch of money out of people, people have basically put up every conceivable populated place in the world by now. There's some places that are obscure enough that they don't, but almost every place where people can get on the internet, they've put up their local place. So it's a town in Hawkins County, Tennessee, 1,484 people in 2000, went up to 1,800. It's part of the Kingsport, Bristol Metropolitan Statistical Area of Johnson City, Kingsport, Bristol, Tennessee, Virginia combined statistical area, Tri-Cities region. Okay, so those are all important things. Why? Because they're going to tell us where the records primarily may be located. Here we have the county, Hawkins County. We go down here to the history and find out that it was incorporated in 1815 and was named after a French Huguenot. Now that's telling us even more information that we want to know about the town. Because it tells us perhaps some of the ethnic people who went in there, tells us when we can start looking for records from this area. And so this is kind of where we are. But one important thing about this is that up here in the upper right-hand corner of the Wikipedia article on this particular place, there's a geographic coordinates. And those geographic coordinates, if you click on them, you'll create what's called a geohack for that location, and it will give you essentially a reference to areas, any other area on the internet that has those coordinates or that location in that database. So it's done a search of all these others. And one of the ones that's the most useful is this GeoNames database. There are many here. You look at a lot of different ones, but this is the one that's good to show. What this will do is it will show us a satellite view of the town with a bunch of markers on it, and those markers are then listed in what they are. So here we have Baptist Church, we have school, we have a chapel, and then let's go back out a little ways. We shut this up, then we can zoom out more and get more of those markers. What they're picking up are all the different important geographical locations on the map. In this case now we have 37. So now we have creeks, another Baptist church, we have Zion Hill School Historical. There's a historical school location. We can look for school records, what kind of records they add. Presbyterian Church. Now this brings up a question. Now we've located the fact that there's Baptists and Presbyterians and perhaps some other churches in here. So what do we do? What do we do with that?
We can look for the records.
Right, so how do we start finding the records for these churches? Well, let's say we want to go to, we find this one that's called the Surgeonville Baptist Church. And so we're going to highlight that. Oh, we're going to highlight it after it comes up. There we go. And Command C, get a new tab up here, put that in, and click on it. And there's the website for the church. So what do? I go
Get a phone
down
number next.
and pick up the phone and call the minister, and I say, my people lived in that area in early times. Do you have, how far back do the records of your church go?
They even have over on the left, they have church history.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you might be able to get it off of the map, off of the website altogether too. So, 1835, 1900, okay. So the question to the minister is, where are the records? Oh, we have them right downstairs, or we have them up in the attic, oh, or they're at so-and-so's house, or we put them in the museum, or they went to the Baptist convention, or whatever. And so what you've done is you've localized it. Now this presupposes that you figure out your guys are Baptist. Most of the time we get to this point when I'm working with somebody and trying to find their great-great-great-grandfather, whoever, and we've got to the place, we've identified it, we've looked at it, we have a feel for it, and then when we say, well, which of all these churches do they belong to? And they go, I don't know. And I say, well, there's your first research assignment. Start looking at your ancestors and come back towards the present until you figure out when
If you look
which
at that
church they
first
were.
paragraph, about 2/3 way down, it says Jack Harrell.
Uh-huh.
That's my fourth great grandfather.
Okay. So that's how fast we can get
His
to,
name's actually Jacob, but
yeah. But let's suppose, just for supposition, folk, that you didn't know all that information right now. We've now found it. And how did we find it? We didn't go looking for Jack Harrell's name. We could have, because he's right here on this website. But we did go look at it. And how do we know it's the right Jack Harrell? Because we've identified the place where he lived first, before we started going vaguely off into searching for names. Okay, so that's the kind of thing that we want to come up with. This is how we get. Now, it doesn't matter where you are. I'm using this one because you brought up the place, but it works no matter where you are. If you were looking, for example, I was helping a patron up in the Family History Library in Salt Lake, and the question was about a little tiny town on the side of a mountain in northwest central Italy. And they kept telling her in the library that there were no records. We don't have any records from that area. Well, whenever somebody says something like that, the first thing that I think is, they're wrong. There are records from that. Whether they have them or they don't have them, but that's not the answer. You don't say there are no records. There are records. They're just, maybe you don't know where to find them, or maybe you still have them and you don't know you have them, or anything else like that. So what we did was we went to Google Maps, we looked at the place, we drove around a bit, zoomed out a little bit, found 3 Catholic churches within a mile of this little town, went to the closest of the 3 Catholic churches, looked up their website, found out the diocese, went to the diocese, found the whole listing of the diocese, found all the references to records, and then went back. Then she went back to the family history library people, and they still told her they didn't have any records. So the next day she came back to me, and we went back to the records, and eventually what we did was we found that there were civil registration. They were looking for parish registers. We found the civil registration records for the same area and began pulling up her family surnames in that civil registration. Well, that's where I end up walking out of the situation at that point. I have no idea what happened. So I never know the end of the story, but that was how we got to and it was all based on the maps, and it was all based on using the geography of where the people lived as to how we got to the records. So that's really the whole key to the searching thing. The searching thing is we're using a tool called Google is a search engine. We could use other search engines, but as you're using that and you're focusing in on mapping areas, then you're getting a better idea of how all of these places are related, where you would go to find the records. So now we have a county. We can look in a county record. What I would do next, if I were just doing genealogy type stuff, I would go to the Family Search website. I would get on the catalog, and I would put in Tennessee, and go out and look for Tennessee records. And then I would go to places within Tennessee. What was the name of the county again?
Hawkins.
It was Hawkins? Okay. We go to Hawkins County, and here are more records. In this case, I would look for church records. And we've got a couple of different types of church records here, but then we would look for places within Hawkins County, and there's your Surgeonville, and you have church history, of the Long Bend Baptist Church, and then you have history of Hawkinsville, of Surgeonville. So apparently the original name was Long's Bend, which also gives us additional information about that particular place. One of the stories that I like to tell about this is when I was little, I lived in a little town in eastern Arizona for a while, off and on, usually in the summers, but I did live there for a while. And they would talk about a place south of St. John's called Slough. Now, a slough is like a watery, kind of swampy area. S-L-A-O-U-G-H. And so that's what I heard, that was the Slough. Well, when I got older, I found out that my grandfather had lived there in that place for a while, that they call the Slough. And so I was out looking for it. It took me a little bit of a time with maps and everything else. I could not find anything that was even vaguely called the Slough. Well, it turned out, as I was looking at the maps for the, the older maps, I found out what they were really talking about. They were talking about a part of south of the town that was called El Salado, which is salt in Spanish, or the salty place. And when you translate El Salado into English, it came out the Slough. So sometimes you have to be a little bit inventive when you start doing this searching through place names, but generally speaking, you can find just about any place when you do it. For example, if we wanted to find out if there really was a place called Poor Valley, Virginia, we could go to the USGS board on geographic names. And this is, the USGS has been creating this since the 1890s. They've been putting together this, and by law, and since 1947, they've been collecting every name they can find off of every geographic map, every map they can find around the world. And so in the United States, you can do a search, and on foreign countries, you can do a search. But you come here and you go to Poor Valley. Is it Poor?
Little Poor Valley.
Little Poor Valley, okay. Up. And the state, we want to see if it's in Virginia. And we don't want it, we don't have a county, so we're just gonna go look for
It's
it.
Scott County.
Well, we do, but, you what?
It's
It's
Scott.
Scott County.
Scott? Oh, okay, well, we could.
But we don't know that.
We're gonna look for, it's coming to come up anyway. Let's see if it does. Sometimes it takes a couple of minutes if you don't put in the county, because it has to search more. Here's a Little Poor Valley in Scott County, Virginia, in the Gate City map, and a Little Poor Valley in Hawkins County, Tennessee. Okay, so there it tells you they're both. And this one, if we click on it, then down at the bottom down here, it gives us the decimal coordinates. These are not the minutes, seconds, degrees things that we see, but these are the decimal coordinates. And we want to copy those, and then we pop back up to, let's see, where's map? Let's go back up to a map. When we get to Google Maps, get that out, then we can put those coordinates in and go look for them. And that will give us the center of that particular place in Virginia. It's just across the, obviously just across the border from Tennessee. Now, it would depend on the time frame, and it would also depend on where these people thought the big town was. If they were going to the county seat,
Gate
they
City's
may
in
have
Tennessee.
been living close enough to Virginia that they just, or in Virginia, they would have gone one place, and if they lived across the line in Tennessee, they may have gone someplace else.
Well, the interesting thing is, Jones had lived in Little Poor Valley, Virginia, and they always went down to Tennessee to find their wives. And I finally figured out, they were just heading up the valley.
Yeah, and they probably didn't even think they were going to Tennessee because they didn't realize.
Well, I'm pretty sure they knew.
Well, they knew the border was someplace. Yeah. Okay, so that's kind of the way that we can do this. Okay, let's back ourselves out of all this. Now we've got to go back to the concept of looking for the names of the person, or for families, or whatever we're going to look for. In this case, we're going to use the Google little squares over here. See all these different apps, and then we have more, and then we have even more. These are all little programs, or big programs, that are available from Google for free, are part of their listing of all their different programs. And some of these are going to be real helpful for genealogy. Some of them are going to be helpful for you personally, but not necessarily help you find people, but would be nice to know about. So we're going to go look, this time we're going to decide for books. Well, first of all, Google has the largest collection of books in the world, and they have digitized millions and millions of books. They don't usually say the number very frequently. It's been a long time now, probably a couple of years since they put out anything that had a number on it, but when they did, the last time they did, they said they had digitized 32 million books. So speculating that, you'd probably be up in the 50 million range, which makes them the very, very largest library in the world. Now, all of the books in Google are in 3 different categories. So let's say that I was looking, what I would start looking for here is, let's say, Tanner genealogy. So I look for Tanners and I want to know about Tanner genealogy. And I want to go to, well, I've got to start out in books because that will not get me. So let's go to books and look up Tanner genealogy. And in that one I've got about 19,000 books. And the first one up here is called William Tanner of North Kingston. And that is my remote great-grandfather going back to the 1680s, who is the first Tanner from our line who shows up in America. So there we have some books, and then we have other books here, thousands of books. Now they come up in different categories. If you look closely at this, which you may not be able to see on whatever, there's a category called read. Every time it says read by the books, that means that Google has the entire book digitized online for free for you to look at. So if we looked at that first William Tanner book up there and clicked on the read part of it, it would bring up the search of that book with those terms. Of course, there's lots of places where it says Tanner and genealogy and a book about Tanner genealogy. So, but you could look in the search in the book for any word. You can also add this to your library, meaning you can create your own library on Google. You could go back and search through this. You could download a copy of this whole book to your, when you put it in your library, then it becomes accessible on your phone or on your iPads or on your tablets or wherever you want to get to it. So basically you can create a reference copy that you can use to look things up. So now you've got one book. Now the other problem, the challenge, of course, is that there are other categories. For example, down here, we get down and it says preview. Well, that means that the book is under copyright and is still available, and Google has not got an agreement to allow them to put the book online. So all you get out of that is a little smidgy of the book, piece of the book to look at that may make you want to go look further into that particular book. Let's say I wanted to find a particular book. So I come in here and I look for my great-grandfather. And I find that there's a book called Henry Martin Tanner, Joseph City, Arizona Pioneer. And I go, well, I would really like to see this book. Now that I know that there's a book out there written about my great-grandfather, perhaps I'd like to read it and find out something about my great-grandfather. So I look over here and it says A-Books and Amazon, and I say, well, and it says no ebook available. Well, that means what? I don't know, but let's come back to that. We decide I'm going to go look for this book on Amazon because I'll just say, well, I just like to buy this book. So I go out here, and of course it's $11,125. And I go, well, I don't think I want to put that on my credit card, so I think what I will do is see if there's some other place to find this book besides trying to buy a copy of it. And now what I do is go back to Google and say, okay, where else? How about a library? That sounds good to me. Well, this is what happens. Now when we do that, then Google takes us over to WorldCat. And this is just kind of a question. How many of you have been on WorldCat? Okay. How many of you will repent and go on WorldCat? Let me tell you how this works. Google searches websites. WorldCat is the combination of all, not all, but a huge number of library catalogs, which are not necessarily searched by Google. So the things you can find in WorldCat are not the same things that you will automatically find on Google. And in any event, the things you find on WorldCat may be on page 700 of 150 million, hits on Google instead of looking for what you want. And the important thing about what happens here with WorldCat is now it's got the book. It gives me some information about the publication and everything, but down here, if I put in my zip code, it will tell me the closest libraries that have that book. So there's one up at the University of Utah, 36 miles away, and I could, since I happen to be sitting in a library here, I could probably go get interlibrary loan and get them to get me a copy of it.
Now, when it first popped up there, it had a thing on the side that said, Pleasant Grove has one, American Fork has one.
No,
Florida City has one.
that's not where it's saying it has. This is where the holdings are. What it's
Those are
saying,
just close libraries? to
yeah,
the
what
zip
came
code?
up was the closest libraries.
Okay.
Yeah, and these are all, up around American Fork, Orem, UVU Library, Highland, Lehigh, Provo. Okay, so these are all the closest nearby libraries to that particular zip code. Yeah, but you could go to any one of those libraries and do an interlibrary loan if you had a Provo library card or Orem library card or wherever, Springville or Pleasant Grove. You could go in and say, I'd like to get this book. It's up at the University of Utah. Can you order it on interlibrary loan? So there's one way to get the copy of the book. You'll recall back here that Google said that there was no ebook. There was no electronic book for this. Well, that isn't necessarily true. So if you take a copy of this, what I would do is copy that, and then one of the places you'll see on my list of places that I like to go is, of course, Family Search. And one of the things that Family Search has is a huge collection of genealogy and local history books, something over 150,000 of them completely digitized and searchable. So now we want to see if they have it. And there's the book, completely digitized and searchable. Now, what's the question that came up? This book was published in the 1960s, so it's quite obviously still under copyright. So how did it get here into the library? Well, the same way other family history books do that are recently published, and that is the author or whoever owns the copyright assigned that copyright over to, didn't assign it, but gave permission for that book to be digitized and put online. So even if you have a copyrighted book, for example, there was one of my friends was, when I started to explain this process, said, well, our family organization has this book that I don't know if they have any copies anymore of the book or what, but I would certainly like to see it online because a lot of people could use it. And I said, well, then contact your family organization. She contacted the family organization and said, well, what about putting the book online? And they said, you mean it's not? They didn't even realize that they hadn't put it online. They thought it would be kind of automatically put there. She said, no, you've got to tell them as copyright holder, you've got to get the copyright holder to give somebody permission to put that online. So she was able to get that process started. So you can see that this is a way that a lot of these books are going to get get up there. Okay, so now what do we do? Well, we can go to some other websites. So the first one we want to go to is archive.org. Now, archive.org is this is an interesting organization. This is a foundation, and archive.org is their idea is preservation, all types of preservation. Video, live music, audio, text, everything that's out there. You can see, if you could read the number, is that there are about 7.2 million texts out there. What's the difference here? The difference is that all of these books that are on archive are in the public domain. You're not going to keep running into things that says you can't look at this book because it's copyrighted. They've only digitized books that they have that are completely on the up for people to read and download and use. So you can download virtually everything that's on this website to your computer if you wish to do so. And what I was mentioning is that this last week, well, I'll get to that point when we get to that. You might notice that they have Grateful Dead concerts on here. Actually, they have about 11,000 Grateful Dead concerts. Okay, so anybody, who's the Grateful Dead?
And
A band? Okay. What do you know about it?
Jerry Garcia just died here a few years ago.
Okay, Jerry Garcia, the band. I didn't wear my Jerry Garcia tie today. I wore a Christmas tie. So,
Came out of San Francisco in the.
yeah, okay, so, yeah, people ought to know a lot about it. Okay, but who are the Grateful Dead?
Our ancestors.
Well, I don't know. Some of mine probably aren't that grateful. No, here's the story. The Grateful Dead is if someone dies and they are buried and their grave remains unmarked or lost, and you come along and you research and you do the research and you find out where this grave was and you mark the grave, then that person who's dead owes you a benefit, owes you a favor. So that person is the Grateful Dead. The Grateful Dead are the people that owe the genealogists who find their graves a favor. Okay, so this, when I try to tell this story, is because this was a connection, obviously, to genealogy, but you know, it's a little bit. You need one thing. You mentioned Jerry Garcia. Of course, he was very famous for being a bluegrass player. Probably the most accomplished bluegrass guitarist in the country at the time.
How do you ever get into the Grateful Dead?
Uh-huh. And he also had his own band, which was a jazz band called the Jerry Garcia Band. So, you know, these were not, they're I'm not standing up for the members of the band, but on the other hand, there are some interesting things here that most people don't know. What I usually do at this point is I pull out my iPhone, but I have no service, so I can't play Grateful Dead to everybody on the iPhone. But you'd be surprised if you've never heard it, you don't know. They're not a hard rock group, they're very different, mostly jazz. Okay, but what about the text? Again, we have a lot of places to look. And if I go here and look at all the text, I can see that there's a thing called additional collections. I'm going to have to keep poking around in here because there's so much information, so many different categories. But I can see all sorts of things in here. And when I get down a ways, I see they have a whole category called genealogy with 88,000 items. And when I look at this, I find out they have a complete copy of the United States Census from 1790 to 1930, except to 1940. So let's go back to like the 1880 census and go to my country, Arizona, and then back to my county, Apache. And now what we have is the full copy of the census, and I call this the unexpurgated version because it is basically a copy of the raw images as they came from the National Archives. And you can zoom in so you can see exactly what they look like. And the advantage of this is that you can see all the original notations and everything else that was taken off by the big companies like Family Search and Ancestry when they made their clean copies of everything. So how much of that information would have been useful had it been left on, we don't know until we look at the original and see what happened.
Now, there's a
from
lot of
here.
soldiers in that place.
There what?
Army Fort around there. There's a lot of soldiers in there.
Uh-huh. Yeah, this is the 1880 census.
What army post is around there? Is that Fort Washuka?
No, that's a long way from anywhere. But there were Navajo Indians in 1880 that were not yet quite settled. And Apaches. They were still fighting the Apache wars and still dealing with Navajos and Apaches and a lot of other Indians in Arizona. Okay, so we have this. Now, the thing about this is that you could actually here read it online or get a PDF. And like I was going to mention a moment ago, right today, this last week, I went to Costco and they had a big pile of 4 terabyte hard drives for $119 a piece. So you could get a 4 terabyte hard drive for $119 from Costco and go home and start downloading the entire US Census so you could have your own copy if you wanted to do that. I can't imagine why, but just in case you wanted to know, you could. But the other books here are, so for example, if I wanted to find a book here on Tanner genealogy, then wherever those names came up, then there would be, there are a lot of different references, but they not necessarily finding. But you never know. These are VA pension payment cards, military units in the Union organization, all sorts of different types of things they have on here that are pretty surprising. So it's a very good place to go to start. Now, the next place you'll want to go is called the Hathi Trust. And this is a consortium of over 100 universities around the United States. And what they have decided to do with this website is to make all of their digitized items from all of those university libraries available in this one website. So as they gain partners here, they make more and more university libraries websites available. The good news, they have over almost 13 million books now, and about 30 to 40% of those books are in the public domain. The ones that are still under copyright, there's a problem because they are under copyright because they're not going to put them online. But if you happen to be in that library, you know that there's a digitized copy of that book available in that library. Now, we're in here in the BYU library. BYU, unfortunately, is not a part of this, but it does give us a little bit more access to these materials. We can go in through the BYU website to this, to the Hathi Trust. Now, what happens if I find something here in the Hathi Trust and I put in Tanner genealogy again? And I go down, and here's a book called Descendants of John Tanner. Now, that's John Tanner that joined the Elias Church, and so this is my third great-grandfather, my great-great-great-grandfather. And it says here, right here in beautiful red, protected by copyright law. Now, the reason is because this book was published in about 1940. And so technically, if you just looked at the title and the date, you'd see that it was copyrighted. Well, Copyright law is a little more complicated than that. And even though this says it's protected by copyright, I don't ever believe that. So I would take a copy, I would copy that title once again, come up here to Google, put in the title of the part of the title of the book, and see how many other places have the book. Well, here's Ancestry with a full copy of the book. And here's the Otley Trust, and here's Family Search with a copy. So let's look at the Family Search copy. And if we go down on that from the Family Search copy, to view a digital version of this item, click here. And so there we are with a downloadable, completely searchable copy of that particular book that they just told us was under copyright and couldn't be copied. So there it is. And it published by the Tanner Family Association in 1942. Okay, so this is the, this is kind of the thrust of this, is that once you get started looking, be sure to go back and check everything back through Google, because you want to know what else. If you find military records, then you want to go back to Google and say, well, what else do they have? What is similar to this? What's going to come up if I search on this kind of record? What's going to happen if I search for this book, even though they've told me the book's not available and want me to pay $11,000 for it? And what I'm going to find is that if I keep following the various lines. Now, what I've gotten out of this is I've only used maybe 5 websites. And that's why I focused on those, because out of those 5 websites, I've been able to develop a lot of genealogical information about my family, about other people's families, and everything else in just a few minutes that we've been here. So that's the key. Thank you very much.